I'm focused on his spirit cause it keeps me from his fire. The Holy Ghost was with me, so my fear I leave behind. My sins were all diminished when he took that breath and died. And if you think I'ma give up on my God, the devil is a lie. The devil is a lie. The devil is a lie.
Hello, hello. Welcome to Black Tea News. I'm your host, Christina Barr, and today we're going to be talking about the State of the Union a bit. Also, I want to talk about some arguments that have sparked up in the past couple days, but really right after the State of the Union, there was a big discussion on IVF and stuff. So there's people going back and forth because Trump had mentioned it, highlighted someone who got like cheaper drugs or claims they got cheaper drugs because of him, and it's a young mother who wants to use IVF, so that people who are against IVF are like, oh, this isn't the way, and other people are like, no, we should be funding IVF. And so there's a little back and forth, and I've been engaged in a conversation with someone that I think the conversation is very interesting, so I kind of wanted to go through it. And then there's also a back and forth that my cousin had with a deconstructionist. A deconstructionist is someone who's left Christianity because they deconstructed their faith and stuff, and so they spend much of their time online, not being free of Christianity but very much criticizing it, because I don't know, they're still pressed about it. But she had said, oh, when you leave Christianity, it's just funny because the devil isn't like messing with you no more, and it's just funny how he doesn't exist anymore and it doesn't bother you. And my cousin's like, that's because you're on his team, which was the response that many Christians gave. That was my initial reaction, like, you're playing for his side, ma'am. Like, why would he distract you while you're advocating for people to not worship Jesus, And so she responded to him, and so I wanted to respond to her response because I saw someone else had responded to it, and I noticed that people started to come on his page and attack him and attack me and other people in his comments. And so I wanted to go ahead and respond. So I'm like, I might as well do it while I'm in front of a camera. So as opposed to just making a long kind of TikTok about it. So before we jump into everything, I want to encourage you guys to go to blacktnews.com, check out different content, website, articles, videos, etc. If you like what I do, please consider leaving a donation on the website because it does cost to stream, run my website, and all that good stuff. So you guys can support it. Very much to appreciate it and appreciate you guys. If you guys would like to check out any merch, you guys can go to blacktnews.com, check out merch on the store. You guys can also check out different books and things that I have available at the store. If you would like to support in that kind of way, God bless you guys. Got t-shirts and mugs and so on. And as I said, lots of books that you guys can check out. I got a couple of different events that are popping up that I'm excited. Motor City, I'll be at the Big Ohio Book Con in June. I have a library thing this month. I think it's on the 22nd, and might be Bloomfield Hills or something like that. I gotta double check. But this is Michigan. So I'll be around doing different kind of stuff. So I'll try to keep you guys updated. So last night, State of the Union. How did you guys enjoy it? Donald Trump gave a historic speech in the sense that it was the longest. I think Clinton's was an hour and 28 minutes, and he went further than that. So I'm not surprised. I'm a little surprised that he wasn't the longest already. Trump does go for a long time, and plus he does all these little showmanship things, and he was heckling the crowd and the crowd was heckling him. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it, because usually my first kind of tweet about it was like, oh, Trump is so good at the State of the Union addresses because, he's such a great showman, and he is charming and he is funny, regardless of whether you like him or not. Now, some people have such severe sticks up their butts, and that stick is filled with dynamite hatred, I suppose, that they cannot laugh at things that he says that are just objectively funny. Now, sometimes he's so out of pocket, and I don't laugh at everything that he does, but sometimes it's like, that's kind of funny. That's kind of funny, but he's a really charming guy, especially if you meet him in person. So at least I haven't had a one-on-one with him. That's what I've been told by many people who have had that one-on-one time. So I'm like, oh yeah, he has these really great, powerful moments. You know, when he introduces the hockey team, the men's hockey team, and talks, and he's so proud of these young men who've won this gold medal, and you know, talks about how he's going to give the goalie a great, you know, the Medal of Freedom, I think, and it's just a really, really great moment. And he also announces that the girls team, the women's team, is going to be at the White House. So I'm just kind of like, all that drama with people trying to turn the boys and the girls, or the men and women, against each other and make it all super political, and they're going to end up at the White House anyway, was just funny to me. I had said yesterday I didn't care if they didn't want to go to the State of the Union. You know, they claimed that they had other obligations, and you know, it's, they just did all this stuff overseas, and it's a big ask. I, you know, so I, maybe they just didn't want to do it, and that's fine. Maybe they didn't want to be at the State of the Union for all that time. I can understand that as well. So there could be all kinds of different reasons, and some of them I guess maybe didn't want to go. But it is what it is. If they didn't want to, and you could say like, it's such an honor to always go see the president if you're called upon, etc., etc. Sure, you could say that, but at the same time, there's a lot of people who would say, oh, it was such an honor if I got to go to the White House and meet Trump, but they wouldn't be, you know, really trying to go to the White House to meet Biden, or they wouldn't be really trying to go to the White House to see Obama, you know. It would, I guess I would be willing to do those things depending on what exactly was the reason I was asked to go there. If I was asked to go there so I could give my 2 cents on policy, I would certainly go and give my 2 cents, whether it was Barack Obama or Joe Biden. You know, if I'm there to be like, oh, we're celebrating Black History Month or something, you know, I don't need to be there with Joe Biden to do that. I don't think I would press my way for Mr. You Ain't Black. I don't think I'd do that, you know? So people might not always want to go to the White House, and it's whatever. I didn't think it was a huge deal, but after all the commotions that people were trying to make it a big deal, he says, hey, they're going to go to the Oval Office. Okay. One way or another, very, you know, proud of their win. I have seen Canadians just nonstop on my feed on TikTok being so very upset about it. So very upset. Someone did an animated like AI of an eagle, just like with its you know, like claw, like talon or whatever, pressed upon a crying duck, and with all these beavers in the audience just like terrified. It's so good. Yeah, they're really mad about it. But so anyway, congratulations to our athletes, and I'm glad there was that moment. Trump, you know, gave honors to the to a veteran who was 100 years old, or would be 100 years old. He gave honors to other heroes of that night, and he's always had a good grasp of who to invite and how to make powerful moments. One of the first, maybe it was in his first term. One time I got a phone call from my sister, who's not really into politics, but you know, she votes right, but she's not really too deep into it. And she called me. I don't know what possessed her to watch the State of the Union. And she's like, why do people hate Trump? All this stuff that he's saying sounds pretty good. Like, why do they hate him? I was like, they just kind of do. So he creates these great moments. And one thing that he was doing last night is that he was creating do or die situations with the Democrats to say, are you going to stand for this? Like, if you agree with this, you got to stand. You know, kind of like on the debate stage where they started doing, they raise your hand if you'll support this or not support this sort of thing. Trump did that. So like, stand up if you believe in putting US citizens first above illegal aliens. And You had your Democrats who didn't want to stand for that. You had Democrats who didn't want to stand for the mother of the Ukrainian girl who's murdered on the bus. And Trump, he was like, how can you not stand for that? Like saying stuff like that, like pointing that out to them, to the crowd, to the audience. At one point in time, he just flat out said the Democrats are crazy, and he's said that they were ruining the country. He brought up the Save Act. Hey, you need to pass the Save Act, and he's like, the only reason why you wouldn't want to pass the Save Act is because you want to cheat, and there's so much cheating, and we got to stop it. Now, I'm not crazy about that kind of rhetoric, and like obviously we won the last election, right? Um, it is true that non-citizens have voted, and it's reasonable to make the claim, I guess, that, like, I guess to speculate, like, why wouldn't you want people with birth certificates to prove their citizenship before they register to vote for federal election? It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. It really, really doesn't. And I've pointed out there's some administrative things in the Save Act that could be tweaked to make folks feel a bit better. Like, I can understand maybe feeling like the rollover for like how often they have to check voter rolls might be a little much. So maybe they want to lengthen that or something, or if they feel like it's too expensive to implement, it's an additional financial burden impressed upon by the federal government. You really should check your voter rolls, so that they need to get together. If you want to make sure there's more precise language, if your birth certificate doesn't match your ID because you had a name change, and the bill says that the states have to come up with some kind of process, but it doesn't specifically say what that process is. Now, there's a good argument to not make it super specific because states are different. And the people who are local should know what's best for the people of their state, as opposed to the federal government imposing more things upon them. But with critics of Trump, there is a weaponized incompetence that goes on. Or even a weaponized compliance. Like some of Trump's executive orders, people would end up implementing some really bizarre things in a way that weren't intended, but they're trying to go to the letter of the law to create a really bad situation. Like, oh, we were confused here when we followed the directions. Like, no, were you really confused, or did you want to create a bad headline? So for example, I assume this to be the case. My sister had told me that there's this she had visited some place about George Washington. Maybe it was like his original home or something, and there was a plaque that talked about the fact that he had slaves and that he would rotate out his slaves to different properties to try to stop them from being freed. Because I think in Pennsylvania, there was a law that if you had, if it was 6 months that you had slaves in the state, then they would be grandfathered into being free. So Washington would actually rotate his slaves every 6 months to stop them from being free. Now, I actually didn't know that. That was new information to me when she told me that. And I'm like, wow, that's really messed up. Like founding fathers engaged in like slavery and things like that. I'm like, that one's really messed up. And his wife also had a slave who was really talented at like being a seamstress and other things like that. And I guess she wanted to give her slave to someone else as a gift. And the person that she was going to give them to was really cruel. And so the slave was like, peace out. I'd rather run. So she went ahead and ran, and George Washington kept trying to get her back legally. And I'm not trying to diminish anything great with George Washington and the whole revolution and being the first president, anything like that. It's just a bit of ugly history. So it was removed, this information, from the site that she had went to, because there was some kind of executive order about not saying negative things about the founding fathers. And I'm like, the executive order can't be that extreme where it would just be like eliminate facts of things that happen. It's probably like DEI nonsense or other stuff like that. And so we're like, it probably wasn't Pennsylvania. Let me see. um Let me Google it. Thank you. uh uh he had, I think he did, like, he had property there. From Mount Vernon's, he would rotate them from Mount Vernon's and uh sorry. Let me just fact check this. I mean, I know, I just can't exactly remember the place, but it was between two locations. Um Anyway, he did free his slaves in his will. Um, while serving as president of Philadelphia, George Washington systematically rotated enslaved people from Mount Vernon plantation in and out of the state to prevent from qualifying for freedom under Pennsylvania's 1780 Gradual Abolition Act. So, which freed slaves after 6 months of residency. Washington and his wife Martha frequently shifted enslaved workers to avoid public scrutiny and the legal consequences of the law. So yeah, that's what it was. So and anyway, they removed like this plaque and stuff, and I'm like, I don't believe that um that's something that Trump had in mind when he signed these executive orders to just go and try to erase history that's not so pleasant. But I think that when they say, hey, we remove these things, and there's a headline about it, I think that is designed to make him look bad. And it's just, weaponized how they decide to carry out particular orders to make him look bad. So there's like a weaponized compliance and a weaponized incompetence. Like, so if there's a situation where like, oh, we don't, the federal government said that you need to prove who you are, but we never got clear directions on, whether you can use your divorce papers or your marriage license, you know, then they would probably do that. So it is probably in, I don't know, the best interest of the bill to probably make it more specific because you will have people who will be blatantly stupid to try to create chaos for the Trump administration, is the point I'm trying to make. Um is the point I'm trying to make. So um but I don't understand why anyone wouldn't support just showing the birth certificate. And no one makes any good reasons why. And people, the more they defend not wanting to show a birth certificate, the dumber they look. And it is just all very suspicious. So if Trump wants to come out and say the only reason is not to support this, and not support like being a citizen and proving you're a citizen when you vote, is to cheat. And I don't think that's a far-fetched statement. Because or that reaching of a statement, because it is really baffling. Do I believe that if they don't pass the SAVE Act, it's going to be the end of our democracy, and that there's going to be a flood of just people who aren't citizens voting and stuff? No, no, not necessarily. But is it true that there have been non-citizens who have voted? That happened at least 15 times in the 2024 election in Michigan. I don't know about other states, but I have mentioned quite frequently that there was a Chinese national, at least in Ann Arbor, who just registered to vote with a student ID. That should not be able to happen in the United States of America. So there are contentious moments anyway from the State of the Union, again, where he was heckling the Democrats and the Democrats were heckling him. And I watched Ben Shapiro's show on this, and he's like, "Oh, it just makes the Democrats look so bad. It makes the Democrats look bad. It makes the like, oh, Trump is creating all these moments." And I think there's moments where they definitely look really bad, but I think a lot of that is they look super bad to us. Maybe they look bad to normies and maybe independents. But at the same time, I think a lot of people will also look at the chaos, like from him heckling them and them heckling him, and say, this is a lot of chaos, and I don't like the disunity here. So the benefit of Trump's enemies is that they always usually look crazier than anything he can do. But I don't think that's going to be necessarily enough to turn the visual tide on people's sentiments about the midterm. So I have kind of mixed feelings about the speech. I thought obviously there were great moments, but at the same time, and you really do remember moments more than you do remember policy. But I don't know, I thought it was kind of divisive. and they're so divisive. So I understand it. I do. And I understand the contrast he was trying to create. But usually when Trump would give a speech, it really wouldn't be divisive. And there'd be all this reporting, like Trump's first inaugural speech, like it was dark. Oh my God, it was divisive. And there was a speech he gave at Mount Rushmore. That was a great speech. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's dark. He's so divisive. Oh my gosh. But his speeches aren't usually divisive. Maybe like at a campaign rally, but even those, there's just a couple moments here or there. I thought this was one of more divisive speeches. And again, I understand trying to create the contrast, but I think where we won't mind it so much, I don't know if the rest of the country is going to feel that way. Like, oh, he owned them. They might be like, man, this is a lot. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings. I didn't like when he called out the Supreme Court, which I believe Obama did that in the past too, but that doesn't mean that I like it or it's okay because he did it. I thought the ruling with the tariffs was the correct ruling. Him continuously using emergency powers. If he wants to use other laws to implement his tariffs that he has powers to do, that's one thing. But I don't want Democrats to say we are having some kind of climate emergency, therefore I can institute all these tariffs that are going to ruin the car industry. So I just didn't care for that. I didn't find it terribly presidential, but great moments. Not my favorite State of the Union. I think he's, his first address, like some of the ones that he had in his first term were just so kind of flawless. So I have more mixed feelings about it, but you guys can let me know what you think about everything. Now, I do want to talk about some debates that happened online, because Trump had highlighted a moment about a woman who was buying cheaper drugs for IVF and protecting IVF, even pitching to fund IVF is something that is like a campaign promise from Trump. He didn't really know much about the issue until there was that, I believe it was Alabama ruling, and everybody went crazy about the Alabama ruling, and this was like during the election time. And they're like, we got to fix this. They have to fix this and stuff. And Trump advocated that they fixed it. Now, the actual decision was, or the actual case was this: there was 3 sets of parents who were suing a fertility clinic, an IVF clinic, because they're supposed to secure the embryos and have them watched and so on. And someone within the facility somehow got to like where they had the frozen embryos, they removed them, and then they dropped them and they killed their embryos. So they were suing for wrongful death of a minor. So the court found that under their statute, there's nothing prohibiting of these embryos from being included in the definition. And the IVF clinic was like, no, these aren't children. And by the way, they're their property, and the parents treat them like their property, because some of them even sign like you can donate them or discard them, like all these kind of different things that you can do to them. So they're not treating them like children, you know. And they kind of have a point, that, but not a good enough point to disqualify them from that particular law. So it wasn't a criminal law; it was a civil law. So, and they didn't rule that that the parents won the case. They just ruled that they could sue under that particular statute. So they didn't say that personhood begins this time. They didn't say anything about the 14th Amendment or make a new ruling about the 14th Amendment. They just said that they can use this law to sue. So it was really about these parents versus big fertility or big business. And that's the way that we could have looked at it. That's the way we could have framed it, and protected these parents, as opposed to deciding to protect the IVF industry that was pulling its hair out, saying that, hey, we're not gonna be able to survive if you're telling us we have to treat the embryos like they're children. So you got to quickly make some protections for us. So there were some Republicans that were called, like, in a panic, and they started, appealing to their constituents who was really upset. So they, reached out to Donald Trump, and I guess that's when he started to kind of, get on that particular train. But there is a conflict within the pro-life movement about IVF and whether it's ethical or not. So the reason why pro-lifers say it's not ethical is because life starts at conception, and it purposely creates all these different embryos that don't make it out to a live birth. And well, let me just, the idea that it should be paid for by the taxpayers, because we want more children, we're pro-family, etc., etc. It's just making a case that it's a good thing to do. There's a lot of things as far as healthcare that's just a good thing to do. That doesn't mean that we pay for everyone's medical expenses. It doesn't mean that we're just like, okay, cool, we'll just have universal healthcare that pays for any single thing, because it's just a good thing that people can be cared for in this kind of way. We don't reason that. Maybe Democrats will reason that, but that's not a position that the right has really taken. So if it's, the argument is we should pay for it just because it's a nice thing for parents. Okay, well, there's lots of nice things we could do for parents and for children who already do exist, because we're talking about hypothetical children who don't exist yet, but you want to use a procedure to create them. There's plenty of children who already exist, or people who already exist who don't have medical care, or their bills are really expensive, but we don't pay for everything that they want or even that they need. So I don't think, especially with the success rate, which some estimates are like, Heritage did a report and it's like 2.6% for like all the embryos that they create, with the success rate of actually getting a live birth. It's very expensive, with a low sort of turnaround, and I don't see how financially it's really justifiable. And of course, if the bill is being footed by the taxpayer, you're going to have more people who take advantage of that. So the price that would go up astronomically. So I don't think it's even good policy. But beyond like the ethical implications and questions that people have. So people have been debating this basically since last night. And so I was going back and forth with somebody, and I if you're pro-life and pro-IVF, and you're debating someone who is pro-life, and anti-IVF. One of the worst arguments is to say, without IVF, my grandchild wouldn't be here, or my friend wouldn't be here, or etc. And I can understand why that's a very compelling argument. But when you go into like the personal anecdotes, things, stories like that, it does leave you open to be criticized. And a lot of people cannot take that. That's why a lot of times when there's abortion debates on TikTok or places like that, people will say we don't want any anecdotal stories. Anecdotal stories can be very effective. Like I was so poor and I couldn't even take care of myself, and I didn't want my child to suffer, or I struggled with postpartum before, and they could lay out a really good case emotionally why the abortion made sense and why you can sympathize for why they made sense. But does that mean that it was ethical? Does that mean, that they made the right decision, that they couldn't have made another decision? No. But it can be very compelling, but it doesn't mean that they're making a good logical, um, you know, reasoning as to why they can justify their abortion. So, if it's just friendly piece of advice, however you feel about this topic, it just doesn't make sense to go the route of, without IVF, my grandchildren would not be here, and that's why you support it, when you're talking to people who believe that IVF is killing more children than Planned Parenthood. It's not going to fly, because what they're hearing is you're saying that the ends justify the means. And as long as there's a child at the end of the rainbow, it doesn't matter what sort of moves that you make to get the child to exist. And if all that matters is there's a image bearer of God out there who now exists, who's loved, and so on, or just exists, again, the ends justify the means. Well, we wouldn't say, and people get really upset when you bring up this example, but it's just a test of logic. You wouldn't say that rape is okay because a child now exists and the child is a blessing, amazing, made in the image of God, etc. But it doesn't make what happened okay. Or if a man like kidnapped a woman, was impregnating her with a turkey baster or something like that, like the movie Don't Breathe, we wouldn't say it's okay that he did that because he really wanted a child and now a child exists. So the ends justify the means. You have to really justify the process itself and whether it is ethical or whether it can be done ethically. But that's not the right way to go about it. So I was going back and forth with someone on Twitter today, X. I still call it Twitter, but and it was someone who made that case, like, without IVF, I wouldn't have my grandchildren, and it just was really interesting how the conversation kept evolving, because it's someone who's Christian and I guess is pro-life, but it just kept evolving into kind of a more pro-choice philosophy as she defended this particular worldview. And so she had said that it's not a child until it's in the womb, and that was like the argument that the IVF clinic was making after they allowed the destruction of the children, of the parents' embryos. They're like, it's not in the womb, therefore it shouldn't be considered a child, therefore it shouldn't have these particular protections. And she said it's not a child until it's in the womb. And she quoted, like David said, he formed my most inner parts, he knitted me together in my mother's womb. So I'm like, okay, but Jeremiah, God knew him before he was in his mother's womb. So it's not the being in the womb itself that makes you a person. And so she kept trying to argue personhood from you're not a person unless you are in the womb. And then she ended up justifying with it because, and I'm not saying this isn't like kind of a interesting argument, but IVF will fail a lot because, I mean, embryos, they do, a lot of them do die early. And so she said like 40 to 60% of embryos aren't going to, I don't know if she said they were going to make it, or only that amount makes it, or only like 40% make it. But and so from that reasoning, she wanted to justify IVF. And I said, okay, but you're making like a viability argument here. You're saying that because only X amount will or can survive, then that's like the point where you're going to decide that you're going to consider them to be a person because of the success rate, as opposed to them being a whole unique organism. And you get to conveniently pick this part of when they make it in the womb because you support an unnatural conception and an you know, and then you support an unnatural implantation. So I think there's a difference between you living and dying naturally, as opposed to people taking precautions that will lead to what to, like I said, 2% success rate, and then it's beyond that too. There are people who actually discard their embryos. There because they don't want the certain sex or whatever, or they're concerned about different things. Like there's one person who was a geneticist or something in this field, and they were talking about like, oh, imagine if we could cure blindness. And they weren't even actually talking about curing blindness. They're talking about what if we don't implant to people who are blind in the womb. So you're like, okay, you're talking about getting rid of particular individuals who already exist, but they don't have particular characteristics that you like, or it could be like sex selection. I had a friend, or someone who we worked in an office together, and or I used an office to stream stuff, and he worked in the actually like worked in the office, or rented out an office while he worked at this particular place. But we talked about politics and stuff all the time. And he used to work in like a genetics lab and stuff for like doing IVF. And he said that the clinic would get people from like the Middle East who and they would do sex selective you know stuff. And so they said he said that even if there were things that were not great, like some anomalies, I'm not saying that great, but or correctly, but you guys know what I'm trying to say. If they weren't perfect embryos, they would still pick a boy, even if there was something like kind of wrong with them, over the girls, because they just valued having the boys more than they valued having the girls. And so there's a commodification of the children. There's sometimes a eugenics type of a methodology going on. And let's say you have a couple of embryos that were okay, but you don't want that many, so maybe some are indefinitely frozen. Maybe you donate some to science. Maybe you just, they end up being discarded because you can't keep paying them to be frozen, so there's all kinds of different ways that they can be destroyed. Now some of them just don't kind of survive the process, but some of them are being destroyed in other kinds of ways. But when the Democrats were trying to make a bill to protect IVF, they were writing it in the law that parents have a right to do these kinds of things, as far as freezing them and choosing to discard them or choosing to donate them, whether it's to other families or science and so on. So they're, to protect IVF, they're writing it in the law that parents do have the right to purposely kill their children. Or when it came to the Alabama Supreme Court ruling, people were flipping out. The IVF industry was like, we cannot survive if you tell us that we have to treat these embryos like they are children. So I just thought it was wild, I guess, that someone was really making the case that when I was going back and forth with this woman, and she's like, it's not a full person until it's in the womb. I'm like, who told you that? Like, where do you get that from? That's just a decision that you have made. And for other people, it's viability at 24 weeks or whatever. And other people, it's consciousness. And there's people who I've heard say, like, what does it matter? Like, if I have an abortion at like 6 weeks or earlier than that, because so many don't even survive at that point anyway. And they look at the survivability as justification of like, they're not really persons. So and she was taking it pretty personal, saying stuff like, you're accusing me that are my family of committing some kind of sin, and I'm just and people can't be conceived in sin. I'm like, what do you mean people can't be conceived in sin? What do you think fornication is? I'm like, not that I'm not glad that the children exist, but I'm like, most people are conceived in some kind of sin. Like, what? This is the product of our world. That doesn't mean we should encourage those sorts of behaviors. So anyway, I think you can have a conversation about how we could possibly maybe do this ethically, but um the if we're talking about like we do one embryo at a time and then you implant the embryo when you make it, it's so expensive, and the clinics aren't going to go for that. The clinics just aren't going to go for that. If you like highly regulate it, or you're going to make it so expensive that it won't be worth doing. There's other fertility treatments that are, more successful than the process of IVF. But we can try to have those debates and try to move the needle in a more ethical way, but um just so you know, it's not just parents who are facing some kind of infertility issue who want to use IVF. It's also, you know two men, maybe three men who want a baby girl for whatever reason, or a baby boy. It goes beyond just, parents. And I think it was New York who wanted to sue the city. There was a couple who wanted to sue the city because they provided funds for women who were struggling with infertility, or couples that are struggling with infertility. And they're like, well, if they can use that, then we should be able to use that money for IVF. Now, these men aren't infertile. They just don't want to have sex with women. Like, that's the problem. But they with marriage being something that in our law is includes same-sex couples, they want entitlements to what they feel other say other couples who aren't same-sex get, even though procreation is just part of their natural order. They want to be able to rent out a womb at the state's dime, because they say that's what equality is. So there's just all these kind of repercussions. People being implanted with the wrong baby, um some predatory factors of the industry that can all be discussed, but and debated, and they should be. But if you're going to go the route of, it's good because my child is here because it happened, it's really not a great argument, and you are opening yourself up to be criticized. And if you're willing to do that, that's one thing. But if you're going to be all emotional about it, it's not going to go well. It's not going to go well. On a side note, back to the State of the Union, I do want to point something out, because I have this image kind of staring at me right now on my screen. One thing, I don't know if it was like this on every channel. I was watching on Fox, because I don't know if everybody was just kind of plugged into the one cameras or so on. But when they would talk about, there was one part where they were talking about a girl who was like basically confiscated from her parents, and the schools convinced her to transition. And Trump was like, these people are crazy. And it zoomed in on this transgender member of Congress. And there's this tweet here: whoever the producer of tonight's State of the Union broadcast is the biggest troll in America, because they refuse to call their daughter a boy. Camera pans to this guy. Yeah, and I'm like, man, he really looks super masculine in that. Not like super masculine in a good way. I just mean you can tell that's a dude. I'm like, that's probably the most like a dude that I've probably seen him, other than like when he like before he transitioned. And I'm like, geez, he really looks like a guy. So that's why I had retweeted it. You can't hide your nature, bruh. You can't hide your nature. So anyway, I want to move on and talk a bit about this tickety talk. So, my cousin did a response video to someone who's deconstructed from Christianity. And sorry, this is got to switch over my screen. So he did a TikTok. My cousin did a TikTok response to a girl who said that she had left Christianity, and it's funny when you leave Christianity that the devil just doesn't exist anymore. And so the response of many Christians was, That's because you're on his team." And so she responded back to him, and this is the response. And I wanted to watch it and talk about it with you guys a bit. So here we go.
You leave religion, the devil also leaves you too. And that literally blew my mind because now that I'm not a Christian, the enemy does not exist in my life. Like I cannot relate to being attacked by an enemy, this entity that's after me, this devil that wants to destroy me. Like I cannot relate to that because the devil just does not exist. This idea of someone ruining your life, I think it absolves people of accountability and understanding the real world. Once you step out of this indoctrination, there is so much peace. It's because you're on his team. Yeah, it's because you're on his team. I'm sure players said the same thing about LeBron when they joined his team. Man, it's so nice to not have to check LeBron anymore. Yeah, it seems easy. It seems peaceful because you're not fighting against him anymore. You're fighting with him. It seems peaceful because you're giving in to your flesh, and the flesh wants to do what the world wants to do, and the world wants to do what the devil wants to do. So yeah, it seems easy. It seems peaceful. It's because you're on his team.
This is what I want y'all to understand about people who have been deeply indoctrinated by religion. For many of them, this is not just a belief.
You catch the smoke detector beep. So yeah, change your batteries, man.
It is their entire framework for reality. They have built their marriages on it, their identity on it. They have built community on it, morality, afterlife. Everything is built on this belief. So when you challenge.
So yeah, I do want to just go ahead and already point out that yes, when you are a Christian, yes, everything is centered around God, and you do find community and your morals and your values and all sorts of things in that. And by the way, congratulations, you're welcome for living in the West, which has much of the values and ethics that we enjoy that are based off of biblical principles. You know, again, you're welcome. You're welcome. As Ben Shapiro said to Bill Maher, why do you think it is that we agree on like 80% of the things, even though you're a Jew, I'm a Jew, and you're an atheist? And he's like, it's because you live in a society that has adapted a lot of these values, and you were actually born morally on third base. And yeah, we people would ask all the time, like, hey, why is your family so peaceful? Your families, guys get along so great. Why is that? I'm like, it's the Bible, like biblical principles. Like my mom really believed in don't let the sun go down on your wrath, for example. So we, couldn't really argue, especially like the next day. Like we could go back and forth a little bit, but once the sun had gone down, she's like, we're not carrying over animosity. Like we're going to live peaceably. She was determined to do that. And so there's just a lot of really great biblical values that really build strong families and really build strong communities. And mentioning this stuff is not some kind of it's not a diss. It's just a fact. Yeah.
This worldview, you're not just disagreeing with an idea, you are destabilizing the foundation that they built their entire lives on. So their immediate response is not curiosity, it is protection. They have to frame your peace as deception. They have to say you are lost. They have to say it is the devil. Because if you left and you're still thriving, you're still moral, you're still at peace, then the system has to answer a very uncomfortable question. What if this isn't the only way?
So when she's like, oh, if you're there and you're thriving, you start asking, okay, what if there is another way? What if this isn't the way? Which, by the that's what I really wanted to respond to when I saw this particular video, because other people did respond and did good responses to it. But by the way, she doesn't really challenge his video Everything that I heard, and she's like, of him like saying, yeah, you're on his team, you're on his team. You're not really challenging that concept. The beginning stuff of her kind of mocking, like just stating the obvious, like it's a mocking thing. Yeah, but you're not challenging our worldview. Not well. not well.
And for someone who has built their whole entire identity on this being the only way, that's terrifying. So if the devil doesn't exist, then the fear system collapses. Once fear collapses, then you have to question the foundation. And this idea that the devil is not attacking me because I'm on his team is so stupid. So you mean to tell me that the devil literally only attacks Christians, and once you leave the faith, he then retires and he rewards you with peace?
No, that's not what he said, and nobody who's mocking you would say that, but you are on his team. You are on his team, and not only are you on his team, because there's a lot of people unknowingly on his team, and I guess she kind of doesn't know, but she is a cheerleader doing her best to tear other people from the faith. You are an advocate, you are an evangelist for Satan. You're on his team. So no, that doesn't mean that he's not messing with people, but if you having your peace, quote unquote, is what is keeping you in his thrall, why would he try to interrupt that? Why why would he get in the way of that? Just FYI. But there seems to be this idea that she has, like, oh, if you're out here and you're thriving, you're questioning their worldview, people are going to say, oh my gosh, like, what if there's another way? What if there's another truth? What other way? A way to where? What exactly do you mean by that? Because Christianity doesn't promise that you are going to have a thriving, quote unquote, life. Whatever her perception of that is. That's not what it says. And if things go bad for you, that is not evidence that, oh gosh, everything is so terrible and you're outside of the will of God. That's not even what the Bible teaches. That's what some people assume. What did the book of Job teach? The book of Job taught, well, there were people who were criticizing Job after all these terrible things were happening to him. And they're like, okay, well, you're broke now, babe. You're broke now. All these terrible things have happened to you. So that must mean that you did something worthy of being punished, because if you obey and you serve God, then you live your years in prosperity and your years of pleasure. So the fact that you're going through right now, it just really must mean that you did something terrible and you deserve all this ruckus. So what did you do to displease God, Job? And all those friends of his ended up getting rebuked because they are way off base. You're not promised to have some kind of perfect life. That's not what the Bible teaches. When Paul is like, God, can you take this thorn away from me? He's like, my grace is sufficient. My grace is sufficient. When John the Baptist was in prison and his followers came to Jesus and was like, okay, we just want to know what's going on and see if you're legit, because things are looking kind of dark. And Jesus is like, well, okay, well, tell him that the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleaned, and the poor, they receive the good news. He doesn't say, I'm going to give them houses and lands and all this kind of stuff. He said, right now they're receiving the good news. Jesus prepares you for suffering. But there is a peace that passeth all understanding. What does it mean to thrive, in her opinion? Like, oh, I'm out here. What, you're doing your thing? Are you financially stable? Are you clubbing and having fun, enjoying your sin? I can see why that might be enticing. You have a choice to indulge your flesh, and your flesh is very greedy. I'm sure you're out there enjoying your life. But if you think you enjoying your life and the devil just sniggering in the corner like, I got her. Like, why would I interrupt that? And that's should make people question, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be a Christian. Like, oh, maybe there's some kind of other truth out there, because things are really hard for me right now. But if I go enjoy my life of sin and just live for myself, and I don't take up my cross daily, I don't crucify my flesh, I don't agree to be a living sacrifice, which is my good and reasonable service. If I don't decide to renew my mind, if I just want to live for me, you can be happy for that time, but that's not going to get rid of your sin. I mean, or when you're finally judged, you're not going to be under that grace. So you can live life how you want to, but it's not going to change the final destination of your life. But there are extraordinary benefits to being a Christian. Oh my gosh. Going back to my family, how I lived, how we were raised, just having biblical principles. Her saying you can still be a moral person without being a Christian. Well, one, how are you grounding morality is the question. How are you justifying that? Because it just seems like that's an opinion if you don't really have any sort of root for it. But it's also actually true, according to the Bible, that you can still make moral decisions because the law is written on your heart. If the law is written on your heart, you can know what's right from wrong. People suppress the truth. The Bible also says that when you want to do wrong, sin is crouching at the door. That's what the Lord told Cain. You have to choose to make the right decision. But if you're cool with your sin, you're cool going out there living your life, you're cool not living for God, and you don't want to go to heaven, I guess it's your business, ma'am. But that doesn't mean that that's not a compelling argument for God not being real or Christianity being false. It's really not. It's really not. Someone said, like cops and robbers, eliminate the cops doesn't eliminate the robbers. Yeah, so if you have this idea of like, oh, I'm out here and I'm doing so much better because I can live for me without living a life of crucifying my flesh, I can understand why that would be enticing to a lot of people. I watched a video yesterday of a man who said he was really good at being gay. Like, that's how he opened up his video. And he just started talking about how he would meet up with people, go to parties, and just he had so much sex. He was into drugs and all kinds of different things, just living his best life. And it was interesting how he's explaining, because he'd be like, I was doing this, I was doing that, I was picking up guys and blacking out, and I was getting numbers and then not remembering who I got a number from. And he's like, is this worth a parade? Is this worth a parade? Because he was trashing also the culture that promotes all of this degeneracy. And so eventually he's got kind of took a step back and was like, is this culture worth promoting? Is this a good thing? Is this a good thing? I don't think it's good for me. And so he was raised up in religion, and he messaged home and he's like, can you send me my Bible? And his parents are like, we sure can. So then he started reading his Bible. And so he started at the beginning, and then he, got to Leviticus and scriptures about homosexuality and stuff. But he also found different scriptures about how you can choose. And so, like, you can choose whether or not you're going to be obedient to God. And he didn't really see it on like a big dig at his identity, but it was like a fork in the road, like you can make the choice. And so he decided that he was going to try to make the choice, because he's like, living this life of sin and living this gay lifestyle, he said it's a waste of time. Indulging his flesh like this, he said it's a waste of time, and it's not good for him. So praise the Lord. And so he's still struggling a bit. And he says he still has doubts, because he's still, attracted to men. And I think he had slipped up recently, and part of him, he's being like tormented in his mind, like, okay, what happens? Because he's kind of staying with some family right now. And he's like, what happens if I'm alone on my own, and am I going to fall into this temptation, and et cetera, et cetera. So he's finding other people who have been delivered and trying to lean on their testimonies and just continue to make the choice to do good and live good. There's so many testimonies that I'm aware of, people who were just deep in their sin, like that sin led them to such dark places, like David Wood talking about how he tried to murder his father with a hammer and found God in the prison because someone who was a Christian committed a white collar crime, and he turned himself in. And then after he turned himself in, they just went back and forth. Like, he kept trying to challenge his religious views, and David Wood ended up finding out that the Bible was true. And then he prayed. He said, God, I don't know if I'll believe in you tomorrow, but I believe in you today. And so here's my heart. Like, there's not if you can find something to do with it, like, it's all yours. And he prayed that prayer, and God has tremendously used him. And I've seen different people message him, say, like, you really helped me get out of Islam and other stuff. And he just goes back to that prayer that he prayed in the prison of, like, I'm not much, but if you can take what I am and do something with it, then have at it. And it was such a beautiful testament. People I know who were into drugs and all kinds of different things, bound, who totally turned their life around instantly by the wonderful miracle working power of God. So I don't know what her definition of thriving is, but as C.S. Lewis, because I gotta mention this and then I gotta go, because I'm over on time and I gotta get going. But C.S. Lewis talked about our flesh being something that's actually not strong. It's something that's weak, and we don't understand. We want to play in the mud when God is offering us a holiday at the sea. There's so much more in God that we can have, that peace that passeth all understanding, that infinite joy, and of course, everlasting life. But if you want to play in the mud and you think that's freedom because the enemy isn't throwing mud pies in your face or something, then that's how you want to live your life. And you're entitled to do that. You can make that choice, but however you feel about God doesn't change whether he's real or not, and whether you're going to be facing judgment when you are at the end of your life. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. Please go to blackteeners.com, check a different content website, articles, videos, etc. If you like what I do here, please consider leaving a donation on the website, because it does cost a stream on my side, all the stuff you guys can support. I very much appreciate you guys. And I will see you on tomorrow.